today's Energy Central webcast entitled Scott Madden's Energy Industry Update Webcast. Complicated. Now I'd like to hand the floor over to Kevin Hernandez, partner with Scott Madden, to kick things off. Kevin, welcome to the event. You have the floor.
Thanks, PJ. Hi, everyone. As PJ mentioned, I'm Kevin Hernandez, a partner in Scott Madden's energy practice, where I co-lead our Grid Edge community of practice. Next slide, please. Before we jump into the webinar today, I'd like to share with you a little bit more about Scott Madden. As many of you know, Scott Madden is a management consulting firm specializing in energy. Now, our areas of focus you can see here on this slide include things like generation, T&D, grid edge, rates and regulation, natural gas, and corporate services such as finance, HR, supply chain, and things needed to support utility operations. We primarily serve the electric and gas utilities, and we spend much of our time focused on helping our clients navigate a wide variety of challenges. Recently, much of that work is focused on capital execution, things like system planning, DER strategy, electrification, and really, a lot of other things as well. Scott Madden's Energy Industry Update, which we publish about 2 or 3 times a year, is one of the ways that we think is important to keep our clients and really the broader energy community informed on what we see as the most pressing issues that are facing the industry. And today we're really happy to be able to share some of those thoughts with you. Our current edition, as PJ indicated, is themed complicated, which we think is an adequate description given the nature of the business and the landscape that really a lot of energy leaders are facing today. Things like navigating increased energy demand, which we've all heard about, evolving policies, significant capital investment needs, all of which is within this kind of rapidly changing and dynamic national and international landscape. Today, we're going to talk about 3 examples of that complexity. First, Eric Brooks is going to talk about some of the impacts of large loads on rate design, where he'll cover issues such as pricing and cost causation. Of course, all of that demand is going to require significant investment in the energy system. So next, we're going to hear from Preston Fowler, and he's going to cover opportunities and challenges in scaling large capital projects. Lastly, we've all heard a lot about the tremendous load growth that's occurring as a result of data centers and AI, but I don't think we really often hear as much about AI's promise to transform utility industry itself and utility operations. Brian Shelves is going to close us out at the end of the webinar by covering applications and use cases for AI in utilities. So with that, why don't we go ahead and get started? PJ, next slide. So to lead us off will be Eric Brooks, and he'll kick off our discussion on rate design for large loads. Eric, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Kevin. As you mentioned, my name is Eric Brooks, and I'm a manager with Scott Madden. Excited to get into our first topic here. PJ, if you don't mind advancing the slide there. So I think this will come as no surprise to anybody at this point, but given the widespread adoption of generative AI, advanced real-time data analytics, and other forms of cloud computing, we've seen an explosion in new data center infrastructure, both in the US and around the world. And with that comes a tremendous amount of new energy demand required to power these very dense AI factories. And you can see here, we have a forecast recently from S&P that shows expected power demand from data centers more than doubling by the end of the decade. It seems basically every week there's some new forecast coming out, and we certainly don't know or really expect all of this to necessarily materialize. I think it's yet to be seen exactly what effect advanced efficiencies either in chips or the models themselves may have in potentially muting this future demand. But what we do know is that even if just a fraction of this actually ends up coming to be, it's going to be pretty transformative for the electric sector, which has been existing in a fairly steady state of flat to minimal load growth for most of the last few decades. And so, looking at this potential growth in demand, looks like a huge opportunity for utilities and investors to build new energy infrastructure to meet this demand, assuming they're able to adapt quickly and evolve to these new customer expectations. However, moving fast and breaking things are not typically in the utility industry parlance. And this dynamic is really creating a number of challenges for utilities. And you call out a few here just on the right, and I'll speak to them briefly. The first being just identifying what infrastructure is needed to meet this demand, and also being acutely aware of how those investments are paid for, ensuring that there aren't potential cost shifts from large load customers to other ratepayers in any way. Second, these types of customers tend to have some pretty unique service characteristics, which have the potential to impact system reliability. And we've seen some instances of large loads from data centers having an impact on frequency or voltage within a system, and there's certainly potential for some cascading effects if you have a sudden loss of that load or restart of one of these facilities. So utilities are certainly focused on maintaining system reliability as they bring more of these customers online. Next, utility planning tends to look out at a very long horizon, and they plan these systems decades in advance and expect those assets to have upwards of a 40-year lifespan. And so when they think about investing significant new capital for these types of customers, there's the potential for some tail end risk if either that load doesn't materialize or doesn't stick around long enough to recover the cost associated with it, which is certainly a pressing concern for regulators. And then just the last piece around interest and risks associated with new technologies. Given the excitement around AI and data centers, a lot of the hyperscalers are looking at new types of technologies, particularly on the generation side, in the form of new nuclear or large or long duration storage. And with any new technology comes development risk, and it's important to make sure that those risks are allocated appropriately. But PJ, if you don't mind advancing the next slide, kind of zooming out at a national level, all of this load growth and these issues around AI are taking place against a backdrop of already increasing rates, rising concerns around customer affordability. We've seen a lot of rate increases in recent years, largely driven by some pretty significant investments to modernize T&D infrastructure, also turnover in the generation mix, and utilities adapting to increasing frequency and severity of climate and extreme weather related events. And so with that in mind, we've seen a lot of interest from both state regulators, FERC, and legislators trying to understand how rates are designed for these types of customers and how the cost associated with any new energy infrastructure is being allocated. So the map here is a combination basically showing just current count of data centers by state, and the color coding indicates states that have either adopted new tariffs for these types of customers or are adapting existing tariffs and energy services agreements to accommodate these types of loads. And I think the big takeaway here is that while the data center development today has largely been clustered in a few particular regions, obviously in Northern Virginia being the largest, these issues are certainly not limited to those regions. And we've seen regulatory actions even in states that, at least so far, haven't had a huge amount of data center development. And these issues are not isolated, and that even one data center on a smaller system could dramatically impact how that grid is operated and how that utility is planning their system for the future. PJ, if you can go on to the next slide there. So I guess before we talk through some specific details of how rate design is changing and some of the changes that are being proposed to these utility tariffs, I wanted to take a step back and kind of go through some first principles for folks that are less familiar with the industry. And in the simplest terms, utilities invest capital into assets to deliver energy to customers. And in exchange for those investments, they both receive the return on their operating expenses as well as the cost of that investment. And they also receive a risk-adjusted return on that cost of capital as well. And there are a few general principles I'll touch on briefly here. The first being that rate classes really do matter. The way rates are designed are typically through a class cost of service study that's identifying exactly what are the costs associated with serving a unique set of load characteristics. And then based on that class cost of service study, the parties responsible for imposing those systems or those cost onto the system are then expected to cover the cost of those investments. And there is also an aspect of these rates need to maintain a standard of just and reasonableness, ensuring that one rate class is not potentially subsidizing another. Go on to the next slide. There we go. So in order to maintain those fundamental principles, we're seeing a variety of measures taken either by utilities proposing new rates or regulators revisiting existing rates. And there's a variety of kind of risk mitigation provisions that are being considered. And these come in a few different forms. Some of the most common ones we've highlighted here. The first being around minimum demand charges. So these would basically require a large load customer to cover some percentage of their contracted capacity, regardless of what their actual usage is. And this just provides a bit more assurance that those costs will be recovered. The next piece is around contract duration. And so we've seen these tariffs suggesting to require these customers to sign a contract over an extended period of time and really lock in that rate recovery to at least closer align the repayment period with the life of those assets. Additionally, there are also stipulations that require upfront collateral for certain developers that may not meet certain creditworthiness requirements. And in some instances, utilities are directly assigning costs of particular investments to specific customers. But all of these types of provisions are attempting to strike a balance between protecting other ratepayers and mitigating some of those risks that we highlighted earlier, with also enabling economic development and not being seen as an impediment to data center or AI development. Beyond local or state development, there's obviously some national priorities at play here. And from a federal level, there's been a lot of effort to make sure that the U.S. is well positioned to capitalize on the potential value of AI. So certainly some motivations there. And then obviously from a shareholder perspective, continuing to grow rate base, find opportunities to invest in new capital in a smart way is always going to be a priority for these folks. But I think as the title of this EIU indicates, this balancing act is quite complicated and definitely is something that's still being worked out in various places. But PJ, if you want to jump to the next one. So I want to touch on briefly just one example that's really at the epicenter of this discussion. And this is an ongoing proceeding in Virginia. Dominion Energy has, within their most recent rate case, filed a request for a new rate class targeted towards data center customers. I know we mentioned earlier that Virginia is really the largest market by far, and I think this is well known. But this quote here from Dominion's head of their data center practice, I think, really exemplifies it, which is just the sheer scale of that region of the country relative to other markets. And with that comes outsized risk and challenges for them to manage. But also, the folks at Dominion are as experienced as anybody at dealing with these types of customers. So talk briefly through some of the provisions that were included in that proposal. And again, these hit on several of the categories we just discussed. But this proposal would apply to about 30% of their current data center customers in Virginia, as well as new customers that have at least 25 megawatts of demand and a 75% load factor. Those customers would be required to pay a minimum demand for covering 85% of their transmission and distribution cost, as well as 60% of their generation cost. This proposal also puts them on a standard 14-year contract cycle with the option for a ramp-up period during that first 4-year period. They did provide some flexibility for those customers to reduce their load up to 20% without additional fees. But any changes beyond that, of either reducing their load in the future or backing away, would come with some pretty substantial exit fees and penalties associated there. And then the last piece is on the collateral side. This is really a substantial amount of investment for those developers that are not meeting the creditworthiness requirements and would require a $1.5 million upfront payment per megawatt. I will note, so this was reflecting kind of the initial proposal. They've been going through, hearings over the last few weeks, and a set of data center customers recently proposed some amendments to this that would lower the demand charges as well as increase the applicability to 50 megawatts and reduce the collateral. But we'll see kind of where this all shakes out. I think these types of provisions are largely in line with what we've seen in other jurisdictions, and certainly expect to see some alignment over time on these pieces. But PJ, you can advance there just to the last slide. Just to close this out, I think a few takeaways I just want to hit on. First being, this demand growth is here, and forgoing, some major change in expectations for the future of AI, likely to see continued demand growth over at least the next 5 to 10 years. Due to that, utilities and regulators are monitoring this closely, understanding what are the impacts of these new customers, and looking to adapt their rate design to ensure that there is an appropriate balance for managing the risks and opportunities associated with this new load. But I'll pause there and hand it back to Kevin for now. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Eric. Pretty interesting. It's one of those things that you always hear, I think, a lot of industry events, is this need to balance the opportunities with some of the rate impacts. Next up, we have Preston Fowler, who's going to walk us through his thoughts on scaling capital projects. Preston?
Thanks, Kevin. PJ, you can go ahead and go to the next page. So really, across the industry, the money is moving, and it's moving towards the grid. Transmission and distribution are carrying the biggest shares because the load is rising from 3 directions at once: electrification on the customer side, onshoring and industrial policy on the supplier side, and finally, data centers changing the shape of demand altogether. Generation and storage are coming along to support that backbone, but the spend that's most likely to happen sits in the near-term years of those capital plans. The challenge here isn't conviction, it's conversion. It's turning those plans into permits, purchase orders, and ready sites on a regular and reliable drumbeat. 2 habits that we've seen that are helping is, first, preferring proven designs and standardized packages so every project doesn't start as a science experiment. Second, placing projects where siting and interconnection already have momentum. Programs that line up with build schedules, with factory calendars, planned outages, and seasonal construction windows tend to avoid the stop-start rhythm that adds cost without adding much value. With that investment picture set, the obvious practical question is, can the sector actually get the equipment when it's needed? Next slide. So hardware still sets the pace for many schedules. Large turbines, power transformers, switch gears, relays, those long lead items carry multi-year timelines, and while costs have settled back from the peak, they're still elevated. When factory slots are tight, a 2-week slip in one component can ripple across the entire portfolio. That's why so many owners are reserving manufacturing slots earlier and freezing designs sooner, just to give fabrication a clean start. Another pattern showing up is dual qualifying specifications, allowing a part or a B part, so a project isn't pinned to a single component that might be constrained later. A short, executive visible list of the truly critical long leads tends to change outcomes more than any go faster message could do, because it focuses attention where it actually moves the schedule. Some early programs are also pre-buying sub-assemblies, booking factory acceptance test windows early, or even co-funding incremental capacity with the OEMs without drifting into bespoke designs that are just hard to replicate. And when greenfield delivery is just too far out, aftermarket units or targeted repowers can create a workable bridge while the bigger equipment works through the pipeline. Now, equipment is half the delivery picture. People and the way projects are set up in the field are the other half. Next slide, please. Power work is still busy and data center projects are adding heat. Healthy demand is good news, but it concentrates pressure on pre-construction, procurement, and the field. Portfolios tend to move faster than scopes when scopes repeat and standards are clear. This way, crews can build a familiar solution rather than reinvent details under time pressure. Projects also advance sooner in places that already have siting and interconnection advantages. The teams that keep early design, procurement planning, and construction planning in one rhythm see fewer handoff delays. Those are the lost days that rarely show up in a Gantt chart, but inevitably show up in the cost report down the line. And really simple tactics can pay off. Constructability reviews that catch sequencing snags, temporary works plans that are ready before the crane shows up, the clean work packages that bundle drawings, materials, and quality control steps. Layer on short look-ahead planning and lightweight change control, and crews spend more time building and less time waiting on things to happen. The goal here is repeatability. The more a portfolio can feel like a product line, the smoother delivery feels on the ground. If demand is strong and repeatability helps, where is the bulk of live construction actually happening right now? Next slide, please. Construction in progress data shows utilities are out front among all the large owners, giving evidence that pipelines are funded and projects are truly moving. That concentrate isn't just a people story, it's a market signal for where equipment, materials, and contractor capacity will tighten next. In those hotspots, programs that align OEM production slots, like multi-year supply frameworks and standardized designs, are seeing smoother throughput. There's also a geography play here. Clustering projects to share laydown yards, logistic routes, and commissioning resources reduces friction and keeps the field leadership in place. From a delivery perspective, portfolio sequencing around interconnection readiness, outage windows, seasonal work conditions help avoid competing peaks across multiple projects. On the commercial side, pacing awards to cash flow and rate recovery limits the bill shock while still advancing the critical work. Read that construction in progress like a heat map. Then point procurement, scheduling, and supplier engagement where the heat is the highest. Even with smart staging, shared logistics, the labor market shapes what's possible, especially when experience retires faster than it's replaced. Next slide, please. The labor story is really two stories. It's around capacity and experience. Open roles still outnumber hires in many markets, and retirements are shifting crews towards more junior levels. That puts a premium on field leadership. Those foremen and general foremen who turn plans into steady daily output and maintain quality when the tempo increases. Standardizing work packages helps newer teams hit plan rates without heroics. So prefab, kitting, remove the guesswork and reduce the time that otherwise would be searching for parts, redoing setups, etc. Placing in short interval control gives the supervisors their way to recover days, not weeks, when something slips. A small daily correction that can prevent a large weekly surprise. Some programs are even using small, traveling tiger teams to unlock stuck tasks across multiple sites without burning the local crews. And the basics matter. Apprenticeship pipelines, sensible rotations between day and night shifts, and clear overtime rules tend to protect both safety and retention of employees. The more predictable the work, the less the outcome depends on finding new unicorn crews that can adapt to everything. Next, there's another element that consistently shapes timelines across regions, regardless of how well a project is staffed, and that's interconnection. Next slide, please. Interconnection still remains a multi-year journey in many parts of the country. Although reforms are lifting the quality of the proposals, the overall speed hasn't really caught up with the growth of large load and new resources. Now, projects do tend to move sooner in headroom regions, places where the system can accept additional megawatts with limited or no upgrades required. Flexible arrangements like non-firm or curtailable service for large flexible customers can act as a bridge while the network work advances and tries to catch up. Targeted upgrades and grid enhancing technologies such as dynamic line ratings or power flow control devices unlock some incremental capacity in the near term. For especially large loads, like data centers, behind the meter options can ease pressure on bulk upgrades while the long lead assets are built. Now there's a common thread across all of that, and it's treating interconnection like a program. It's a clear set of milestones, a live view of risks and dependencies, and a weekly status that keeps commercial, engineering, and regulatory work aligned across the enterprise. Given those realities across equipment, people, and interconnection, what are the practical plays that keep the portfolios moving forward? Next slide. So how do we do this anyway, regardless of what's happening? Scaling under a constraint starts by designing for that constraint. On the supply side, portfolios are mixing early OEM alliances with selective acquisitions or repowers when those options promise faster in-service dates and lower effective dollars per kilowatt. Some programs are added funding production or strategic pre-buys for critical subassemblies, at least enough to protect schedule without locking them into one-off designs. On the delivery side, standardization and modularization shorten learning curves and reduce material intensity, making productivity less dependent on those heroic efforts I talked about before. Pairing builds with flexible demand, storage, or behind-the-meter solution buys time while larger wires or plants catch up, and stage contracts that ramp up over time can limit exposure if forecasted load arrives more slowly than expected. At the portfolio level, simple readiness metrics, permits, long leads, site access, help capital flow to projects that can actually move in the quarter that they're talking about. Having 2 or 3 credible paths to commercial operation gives options when policy or supply conditions shift. All of this rolls up into a few simple takeaways. Next slide, please. So the demand signal is strong and the appetite to invest is real. The difference maker here is disciplined execution under real world limits. Thinking about locking a handful of long lead decisions early, industrializing the work so teams can repeat it with fewer surprises, keeping affordability visible in every sequence choice so benefits show up without the bill shock potentially, and then maintaining options across siting, technology, and contracts to absorb the policy or supply swings with less disruption. With those practices in play, capacity can be added at a pace without sacrificing reliability or the customer bill. The bottom line here is disciplined execution is separating outcomes. Kevin, back to you.
Thanks, Preston. There's no doubt that executing on large capital projects is going to be really a core competency of any successful utility moving forward. All right, next up, we have Brian Shevs who's going to walk us through AI and energy.
All right, thank you, Kevin. And thank you everybody for attending this webinar. Very excited to talk to you all about artificial intelligence, where it is, where it's going, and how it affects our industry. Before I get going here, I just wanted to mention that these slides and these remarks were not generated using artificial intelligence, just a regular human brain. So we'll see how I do. If we could advance to the next slide, that'd be lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, so maybe in the understatement of the year, this was June 2024, Mr. Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, said, "My guess is energy consumption goes up quite substantially." I think my colleagues who have spoken previously have indicated this is definitely happening. I'm going to give a couple anecdotes here just from recent news that are going to indicate how much that consumption is going to grow. The first one, if you will direct your gaze to the left-hand side, this is the Hyperion data center that was announced by Meta. It is a 5 gigawatt energy consumption building that when it's going to be built actually in Louisiana, and when its footprint is laid over the island of Manhattan, you can see that it covers a substantial portion of that island. And just another comparison of how the scale of these things, if you were to compare the electricity consumption of this one facility against the 50 states in the United States of America, it would rank 34th, approximately equivalent with Nebraska. On the right-hand side, we put this here, Plant Vogtle. Plant Vogtle produces 4.5 gigawatts of power. That's a nuclear plant in the state of Georgia with 4 reactors. So it's quite a large facility, and was not easy to build. And that is what's going to be necessary just to power Meta's dreams of a 5 gigawatt Hyperion data center. Another quote here from a person who is kind of known for his grand statements, not known to be a subtle person. The AI scaling constraint will move from chips to voltage transformers to electricity generation. We tend to agree with that, although we'll see how it plays out over time. But XAI, for instance, has big plans as well. Their 5-year plan, ranked as a state in the United States, is equivalent to the energy consumption of the state of Oklahoma. So we're talking about very big numbers here. Could there be some overlap? Could there be some double counting? Sure. But as my colleagues and myself have pointed out, these facilities require a lot of electricity. So it's coming, and we want to stay ahead of our competitors worldwide. So we're doing everything we can to accommodate these technologies. Okay, next slide, please. As my colleagues have also pointed out, this is just another view of data center demand based on geographic region. The gray is existing and the blue is future demand. A lot around the Dominion PJM, non-ISO West and non-ISO Southeast. So think, Western United States, Washington, D.C., and then of course, in the Southeast would be Atlanta, Florida, places like that. So we are experiencing a lot of demand, and we're anticipating a lot of demand. Georgia, just some more stats for you to see where Atlanta, Georgia, and the surrounding areas are thinking. Georgia's projecting 8.2 gigawatts of load growth by 2030 in the next 5 years, in the next 4.5 years. 80% of that is coming from data centers. I know they have counties around, the surrounding area. Counties are kind of putting on the brakes and saying we need to slow this down. We need to be a little more deliberate with the approvals that we're making, and let's get some bigger plans in place because of all of the requests for building and demand growth in their areas. Okay, next slide. So we want to shift gears a little bit here. So that's kind of where we are, where we're going. But what a lot of our clients are doing, and of course Scott Madden is helping them with this, is to use artificial intelligence to help us prepare for artificial intelligence. And I've got 3 here just to kind of get the juices flowing, and then we'll go a little deeper into each of these categories. But the first 2, grid planning and grid operations, what AI is very good at is taking a large amount of data, a large amount of variables, and processing it and creating a model, its own model out of it, and then producing outcomes based on that model from new data. You can see how that might apply to grid planning and grid operations. So for grid planning, obviously we're looking for, okay, where is the best place to put a new generation? Where should the transmission go? And there's just a multitude of variables associated with that. It becomes very complicated very quickly. So it could be local politics. It could be the cost of the infrastructure, other things like that. In the grid planning, and then of course the engineering on the grid to make sure it's as efficient and reliable as possible. AI can help with that. Once you build and train the model, perhaps in this case using a neural network, then you just feed it new information to say where, I would like to play, is this a good place for a power plant? How many megawatts should it be? And you could theoretically get answers from that. And the other one is a little shorter time frame, grid operations. Same idea. A lot of inputs, a lot of variables. And AI could help, once the AI model is built, the neural network is built, and outcomes are being generated reliably, you could see, in my mind's eye anyway, an AI terminal right there in the grid operations room that might be making suggestions for the operators, for them to say, what time, giving me a forecast, when should we be doing dispatches, and helping those operators with better efficiency, unlocking generation, unlocking underused generation, et cetera, based on the weather forecast, for instance. So we can definitely see that coming. The last one, siting and permitting. So this is anywhere you have a large volume of data in a database sitting somewhere. And we can imagine where there's siting and permitting documents, throughout the country, just sitting there with very few people reading them. But if you give them to a large language model and train a large language model on them, you could actually see where AI can help both on the preparation of siting and permitting documents and on the review of siting and permitting documents. Okay, so let's go a little deeper. Let's take a look at a few more of these. Similar to the siting and permitting, again, let's say a lot of facilities, a lot of utilities have a great deal of past system and asset health reports. These are necessary to communicate like what's going on at the site level, at the asset level. Okay, we have a lot of those in the database. Let's feed those to AI. Let's train a large language model. Let's generate a GPT. And then when a system engineer, an asset owner comes along and says, I need a health report, feeds that model new information based on the current status, or even points the model to new information. And that AI model can then build out that system or asset health report and put it in the right format, in the right language, in the right sequence that the utility is used to. Another good example of generative AI is maintenance and work order planning and scheduling. This is something Scott Madden's been working on for some years with the DOE, where utilities, again, have a large database of maintenance work orders, and it would take quite some time to train a new person on all of those work orders. And let's be honest, a lot of those work orders are copy paste from previous work orders and then adjusted to accommodate the new circumstances. So we can see AI just going through that process itself, but doing it quite a bit faster and perhaps even more comprehensively than a person would be able to review all the outstanding work orders that have occurred on that system or that component. And then just with the press of a button and some prompts, you have a new maintenance work order plan. You obviously have to review that, make some adjustments, and then it's ready to even be, the AI could even suggest where it might fit the best in the schedule. So that's generative AI is something that everybody's used to. If you're on ChatGPT or Copilot or one of the other ones, you're using this. So let's go to a couple more on the next slide. These are associated with predictive AI. So they're very similar, optimizing combustion and moisture carryover. We've seen these actually in use in the industry. They've been made public. And optimizing combustion, this is similar to the grid, optimizing the grid. So you're an operator at a gas plant and you want to decrease emissions but also increase output. You could see an AI taking all the different variables from the temperatures, pressures, the fuel mixes, the forecast, the actual weather forecast, other things, and putting all of that into its model, and then making suggestions to the operator saying, okay, make an adjustment here, make an adjustment there in the control room that might reduce emissions or increase the power output of the unit. Same thing with moisture carryover. This is a little more technical, but moisture carryover is something of a black box, I've been told. These things are difficult to put, to get a physics model and wrap it around this. But AI is able to do this given inputs, and the model is then trained and shown what good looks like. We want to decrease moisture carryover to the turbine, of course, and AI can help us do that. AI can analyze that model, analyze that situation, and give us an output based on what kind of the type of fuel that we use or the fuel design that we're intending to use. What does that do to moisture carryover? Because we want to reduce damage to the turbine and other downstream components. Lastly, expert systems. This is something a lot of utilities we see that they struggle with, or they dedicate resources towards, is distinguishing CapEx from OpEx. Everyone has rules. What is CapEx? What is OpEx? And it needs to be one or the other bucket. So we can train an AI model on those rules and then show it all the previous examples of what might be CapEx and what might be OpEx. And then we feed it new information. And then it makes a suggestion based on all the previous examples plus the rules that it was given and the new information, and it will tell us this could be distinguished as CapEx or this could be distinguished as OpEx. So something else that's just called an expert system. These are sort of subcategories of artificial intelligence that we've been seeing in use throughout the industry. Okay, so to summarize, I will echo my colleagues comments that data center use is increasing, energy is required, and the percentages are quite astounding in my personal opinion. But artificial intelligence is also something that can help us. It can help us prepare for artificial intelligence. It can help us get more out of our existing systems and networks. And there are really a multitude of use cases already being explored in the industry. And of course, Scott Madden is here to help. We are helping our clients do that. That's all I have. Back to you, Kevin.
Thanks, Brian. And I'll invite my other panelists here to come online. We've gotten a couple questions in, and Eric, I'll probably start with you on the question of data centers. There's been the question that came in. There's been a lot of this discussion recently around data center flexibility, right? And so, can data centers flex their demand in a way that allows them to come online faster, allows utilities to serve them some faster? It may be necessary for them to accept some, either reduced or capacity or service interruption or something of that nature. Have you seen examples of that, particularly as it relates to large load tariffs or some of the energy services agreements that data centers have?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I think the questions around flexibility and how these systems can operate in a kind of less impactful way on the grid has definitely been getting a lot of attention lately. I think we've seen some really interesting announcements from some of the tech companies like Google or Emerald AI that are testing out kind of how to manage these AI loads in a more creative way and either shift load or reduce it during periods of peak demand. I would say for the regulatory actions, we've definitely seen some interesting things at the transmission or RTO level. I know PJM came out with a proposal recently, and SPP has also come out with a proposal to offer, as you mentioned, kind of options for these large customers to connect to the transmission system, either with a partial load while infrastructure can be built, or basically, I think PJM referred to it as a non-capacity backed load. Basically, I think it's initially would be optional, but then potentially required for these customers to take some level of curtailment during those periods. I would say at a state level, we've seen some examples where these large customers are required to have some interruption provisions within the tariff. However, I think most of what I've seen, at least, has been really focused on how the grid operator can maintain reliability during a period of grid stress and basically setting some rules for when they're able to curtail that load. I think from the industry, from the developer perspective, it seems, they're really looking for this as a option or benefit to get service faster. I haven't quite seen that yet. I think one thing I'll note in the Dominion filing, they did commit to a future interruptible large load tariff at some point in the future. At least today, I haven't seen any details on that yet. But I think it's definitely going to be something that's going to be interesting to see going forward and kind of how they position that. But it'll probably take a bit of time for both the developers and the utility just to get comfortable with how that will operate in practice.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It does seem like there's a lot of momentum, or certainly a lot of interest in speeding the process from all sides, really. Preston is, if we see that speed accelerate, right? If we see that data center demand, the demand's already there, but if we start to see those coming online in a quicker way, kind of back to the capital execution piece, how do we plan around that? What is a balanced way for utilities to approach that?
That's a good question. You're absolutely right, Kevin. Really, kind of one path is, ramped up minimum take structures. So supply scales with the realized loads. So think about, ramping it up and along the way. Another is, kind of pairing those behind the meter or flexible services so that load can land while the bulk upgrades catch up. And where feasible, co-locating with firm resources can simplify the interconnection. So think about them locating their data centers and everything else near things. One that's relatively recent, right, is what used to be 3 Mile Island, now is the Crane Energy Center, right? Microsoft helped fund all that and then locate it in a reasonable distance away so that they could get the interconnect and the takeoff of that.
Yeah, pretty interesting. It seems like there's going to be a need for a lot of different tactics and strategies there.
Absolutely.
Brian, from your standpoint, you mentioned these applications of AI, within the utility context, and one of the questions, we in our work we've seen a lot of regulator demand and customer demand for more access to data. And data really is at the heart of a lot of those applications. How are utilities or others handling that data? What kind of concerns or considerations do they need to consider? I mean, is it, do they need to ring fence that data and protect it? Does it need to be on premise? Is it going to be moved to the cloud at some point? What is the perspective on that?
Yeah, it's a good question because there's a lot of different perspectives depending on who you talk to. The people that want to get the most out of artificial intelligence want that data to be out on the cloud, and there's different versions. There's a government cloud and there's commercial cloud, so there's ideas about where it should live there. But there's a lot of utilities, and I do a lot of work in nuclear power, and those nuclear facilities aren't really excited about just letting their data go out onto the cloud. So right now it is one of the speed bumps that we're seeing our clients struggle with, is just convincing people in legal or supply chain or IT where the data should live. And some people are going with a hybrid approach where it's like you said, like some stuff is ring fenced and they do a self-perform data center on site that they only have access to, and then they put the rest on the cloud. Some of them are just putting it all onto the cloud. I haven't necessarily seen anyone that's putting all their data into their own data center yet, although I'm not saying that doesn't exist. But so there's a spectrum of responses to that.
Have you seen a lot of stakeholder interest there or regulator interest? I imagine that'd be something that regulators would be particularly focused on.
I personally have not. I'm not saying that regulators haven't questioned that, but the main thing in nuclear was just releasing nuclear information. There's a rule. I do not recall the exact number of the rule, but there is a rule in nuclear that you can't release certain information to the public. So that's what people in nuclear specifically are most concerned about. And of course, everyone's, customer data, client data, performance data, they don't want that just, they want to make sure that it's secure with good reason. And so, but also they want the benefits of artificial intelligence. So it's a balancing act and finding the middle ground and convincing the right people that this is safe, or finding the safest option.
Makes sense. Just looking here at the other questions that have come in. Eric, one for you. For states or companies with decarbonization goals, how are the rate structures adapting to include requirements or options for large load customers to secure or bring their own generation? And it says carbon free, but I imagine it could be any kind of resource.
Yeah, I think the decarbonization piece is definitely a challenge. Obviously, a lot of these companies have set some pretty ambitious goals for themselves, and given the desire to capitalize on this opportunity, you're bringing in a lot of new energy that you're having to manage, or either trying to find options for 24/7 renewables or renewable energy credits or other alternatives to maintain those ambitions. I think we've seen a few examples, and I think we cited a few in the EIU, where large load customers can opt into energy transition tariffs or options that basically either they bring their own or they allow the utility to procure renewables on their behalf. And I think for certain companies like a Google or Meta, those will definitely be a viable option to try and balance those. But I think for smaller players, it'll definitely be tricky on the kind of bringing their own generation. And I think I can't remember if it was Preston or Brian mentioned the kind of co-location. There's definitely some challenges there as well, and just making sure that there are clear rules. And I know FERC is looking at some of this now as well. And I think there will be a lot more to come there. But certainly in areas where, like in the Northern Virginia area, there's limitations on how much you can really co-locate in those highly developed areas already.
Yeah, absolutely. And we got another question that kind of speaks to that in the Northern Virginia area. And, our focus here is really on the electric infrastructure that serves data centers, but there are a lot of other attributes and considerations, I believe, that are important to data center developers, such as fiber and other things. I think water is one of those recently. I don't mean to throw you a curveball, Eric. I was at a conference not long ago where they were talking about the calculus for data center location has changed. No longer is it purely energy infrastructure, or it's really about speed to get the facility up and running. And that may be electric in some cases, and maybe water in other cases, but that seems to be changing. I don't know if you've had any experience with that or heard that as well.
Yeah, I think we've definitely heard a lot about the speed to power, and I think these other resources or constraints are certainly in the mix as well and becoming a bigger issue for these developers.
Hey, Kevin, I'll add something to that as well. As I was at a conference last week. This was in Atlanta. We had a person from Amazon join us, and they were throwing out some very large numbers, I assure you. And Amazon is spending in the next 12 months $100 billion on data centers. And then I actually just read in the Times this morning the combined Amazon, Meta, Microsoft, Google, and one other combined spend of those companies on data centers is $350 billion in the next 12 months. And the reason I say that is money really is at this point not even a huge part of the equation of getting these things built. So if they need a nuclear power plant to power it, they want to pay for that. If they need resources and infrastructure to get over to that facility, they're going to build that. That was my takeaway.
Yeah, I've heard very similar, and we've probably only got time here for something real quick. Preston, just maybe in the last 30 seconds or so, with all that money coming in and all these projects, even for well-executing companies, how are those projects prioritized? How do you pick which gets executed first?
I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, there's kind of three things to maybe think about potentially doing is, there's kind of a light stage gate. So think interconnection likelihood, permit readiness, OEM capacity, customer commitment, rather than kind of a heavy-handed, the traditional model of putting it through all they do around capital decision plans. Others I've heard about, using risk-adjusted schedule values to give more credible kind of commercial operation dates, and then finally kind of others time box their decisions, and they say, hey, if we don't clear this next gate in the next quarter, we're going to move the money that was this to one that's going to be more likely to move.
Makes sense. Well, with that, I think we're just about at time. PJ, I'm going to hand it back to you for some closing remarks.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, panel. Fantastic conversation. For our audience, take a moment to check out the EIU report. It's a great one. It's a good one for this year, and certainly give us your feedback as we pop up that survey as you log off. We certainly read your feedback, and we do use it on future events. Thank you all for attending. This does conclude today's presentation. Have a great day, everyone.